Welcome to the My Tennis Coaching Podcast, your go-to resource for all things tennis coaching. Stay tuned for insightful discussions and practical tips that will make a real difference on and off the court.
You can't use CLA with beginners. CLA is not applicable for newly qualified coaches, and you can't use it with adults. That's just a couple of questions we're going to unpack today on the My Tennis Coaching Podcast with my special guest, John. John, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Steve. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. John, I can never pronounce your
How's it
surname,
going?
so do you want to pronounce your surname for me?
Yeah, so it's Cvitamovic. So, yeah, I'm one of these hard people where everybody just calls me John, or they try and pronounce my surname and it's not anywhere near it. So most of the time when I get to anywhere, they say, "What's your name?" I said, "I'll spell it for you." So yeah, that's me. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, so I'll just call you John or JC like I normally do. I'm not going to try and pronounce your surname. So obviously you've been a friend of mine now for a couple of years, and you're obviously a member of my Tennis Coach Academy as well. So I wanted to just get you on just to sort of discuss your journey from using constraint-led approach or ecological dynamics or ecological psychology, depends how far down the rabbit hole people get. But I just think it's quite interesting because a lot of challenges that I am faced with from coaches is like, you can't use it with beginners. You can't use it with newly qualified coaches. I know you've been qualified for a number of years, but in tennis terms, you're still pretty much a coaching baby as such. So hopefully you can sort of debunk some of those myths today. So I think first and foremost, let's just start off. What got you interested in constraint-led approach or constraint-based coaching?
I mean, I think one of the things that was clear to me as a kid growing up and playing tennis and being taught, and I'm sure you've seen it before, one of the typical things for me as a kid was we'd all line up behind the baseline in the tram lines. The coach would say, "Right, stand here with your forehand ready," drops the ball and says, "Right, hit it over the net into the tram lines." And we just all did it because we were just sheep. And kind of growing up, playing, getting better, getting worse, getting better again. All of that kind of really got me to this point where when I then decided actually I wanted to go down the route of becoming a coach, going through the qualifications, and kind of then that time on the qualifications, on the various courses, it just showed me how things were done at the moment. And something didn't sit right with me. So I felt that when I tried to take the carbon copy, like cookie cutter shape of this is what my lesson needed to look like, or this is how I should be coaching, sometimes there was some positive outcome to it. I could see a player was doing something that I asked them to do, and it felt like I was coaching. It felt like, yes, here you go. Everything that I've learned is kind of now I'm putting into practice and I'm seeing the outcome. But that was like, it wasn't constant. It wasn't like, and when I say constant, it's like I might have one good lesson with a client or with a group, and that would be like a month down the line, and I'm still kind of going through these sessions where it just didn't feel like players weren't really developing. Somebody comes back to me and says like, "Yeah, okay, I've tried it, but I'm still stuck. It doesn't work." And you think, actually, hold on, like, do I actually fully believe in what I was doing? And that's kind of where I got to this point where I was trying to put myself in the place of the client, of the junior or the adult coming to a session, and thinking, if I'm saying to them, and I'm saying it to myself, kind of right, do this, do that, stand here, kind of, you've got to hold your racket this way, you've got to do that. How much would I learn and how much would I take away? And I think that's where I just became slightly more disillusioned with the old school way of coaching. I didn't think it would work for me, because I just didn't have the buy-in anymore. I think that's where it, for me, started to, I lost a lot of that initial kind of blinkered, right, this is the way of teaching tennis and nothing else can work. And then I thought, well, there must be a different way. And fortunately, that's when I kind of started to talk to you a bit more. And obviously, at this point, you'd already been along the CLA journey for some time, and it's helped because you've gone through a lot of things, a lot of hurdles to overcome, and it's allowed me to, and I think some of the other people that are on the academy, to really benefit from that. And I've taken the CLA approach as my kind of go-to for coaching now, which I think we'll come on to this as well, but which I've found that I've invested in more, I believe in more, and I'm seeing the positives of this change, as opposed to when I was your bog standard basket feeding coach. And so, yeah, I think now that I've done it, I don't look back. Obviously, I'm, as you said, as a coach on the whole, I'm still very much sort of a green, wet behind the ears. And obviously with the CLA, that's still very, very new for me, maybe sort of a year or so now, I guess. And it's still something that I'm learning and I'm getting better at. But as you say, some of the things that I've got right, and some of the instances where I've kind of come unstuck. And once again, it's still a learning process. So I am still a long way on this journey, but I'm definitely enjoying the way I feel as a coach, and also the results that I'm seeing with my players and how they come back to me and say, right, I've recently been playing and my level is improving, my game is improving, and I'm happier as a tennis player as a result of the work that we're doing. And then that feeds back to me and says, well, actually, I'm happy that I've invested in this approach and really tried to make this platform, this CLA approach, my go-to for coaching.
Nice, mate. There's loads to unpack in there. I think
so. Yeah,
it's interesting, like how coaching didn't sit right with you, and sort of I had that feeling as well, and I coached pretty early on. I went very much game based quite early on because, again, it didn't make any sense to me. Why am I lining players up and stuff like that? But I was almost, I wouldn't say battered into compliance, but because I worked in a national governing body performance center, like I had to almost comply and conform with the coaches around me, because I was working with some national coaches at the time who were working with some big name players, and they were coaching in that very, what we would probably class as traditional way. And I had to copy them because I wanted to be where they were. I wanted to be on the top courts, to working with the best players. So I was almost battered into submission. So I had to spend 18 years of basket feeding and shouting at players and drop feeding and stuff like that, which is mad, because obviously you were a member at a club not far from here when I was rackets manager. And I look back even then when I was coaching there, and I wouldn't say a bad coach because I was quite a successful coach, but my method of coaching there was very intense, very shouty, very technical, very tactical. And like, I look back now on some of those early videos, it's like, oh my God, like that's probably not the most efficient and effective way to coach. Would you say then, because obviously you're a couple of years into your coaching journey, because you've never really been in a big coaching team, as far as I believe, you've almost sort of been always like on your own, going to different venues. Would you say that was easier to break away from them because you were not influenced by other coaches in and around you? And then the second part of the question is, well, obviously you now work at a center with me, funny enough, where you're in a big team. Do you feel like there is a pressure to conform to other coaches? So did it make a difference you being on your own and you didn't have that influence from a lot of high-profile coaches around you, or just other coaches. And then what's it like now being part of a team where obviously I work in a very ecological lens, but there's quite a few of our coaches who work in what we probably class as a traditional lens?
Yeah, I think from my position, where my journey into full-time coaching has been very much kind of small clubs, where I'm the only coach. There may be another coach, but we'll probably just see each other in like passing ships. So a lot of the work that I've done has been by myself. There are some venues where there are a couple more coaches, sort of where we run kind of almost parallel sessions, but I think that's probably helped me because I've not known anything else. Like you'd go to sort of your coaches sort of county meetups and kind of talk, and you see kind of other coaches here and there, and you think like, okay, kind of that's what they're doing. And then I think to myself, kind of, I can try this. And then I think that's something that when I decided I actually wanted to really change the way I coached, I thought actually, well, nobody's here to watch me. Like there'll be parent, if I'm doing a group class, there'll be one or two parents who stay with their kids or sit on the bench and watch. Some of the parents, majority of them, will just come along, drop the kids off, come back in an hour, pick them up, and off they go. And it's very much been, well, it's just me on the court. I mean, if I'm having to do like a half-term camp and we've got a big number of kids, I'll get an assistant that comes in with me. But 90% of all the coaching that I've done is just been me and a group of kids or a group of adults. And so I've never really felt like somebody was observing how I'm doing something. And actually, I didn't feel like I needed to constantly apply the traditional template of coaching, the traditional template of setting up a lesson plan and kind of following it meticulously through that kind of that process flow of like, welcome everyone, this is what we're going to talk about, blah, blah, blah. And you kind of demonstrate everything and you go through that old school traditional template. So yeah, I think when I then started to go down the CLA, adopted the CLA approach, I just felt like, okay, I'll try it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. One of the things that I was taught very, very early on, and it's something that has put me in good stead, is to do self-reflection. So at the end of a session, even during the session, if I find something that if I'm trying it and it's not working, I'll obviously try and change up the things during a session. But at the end of the day, I've got a journal that I sit down and I write into. I say, right, all the sessions I've done today, whether they were groups, client or with that group, what were some of the things that worked really well? What were the things that maybe didn't work well? And then why did they work well? Was it because I was trying too much? Was it because the players just weren't ready at that time and I was maybe trying to give them more than they needed at that point in time? But I think, yeah, because quite some time now and the majority of my coaching has been just me, I didn't really feel it was a problem to go, actually, yeah, you know, elbow. So your part two of your question, now that I coach in a performance center, in a center with other coaches, and there'll be days in the week where literally all, as you know, all four courts have got coaches on them, and you'll have obviously parents in the sort of the viewing area. Sometimes, and I still get this, but less now, and I know we've spoken about this before, but sometimes I did feel like kind of, oh, are people watching what I'm doing? Because like I've set up my exercise. The players are doing what I'm asking them to do, and I'm just there like watching, and I am observing. And then you see kind of the other coaches on other courts next to me, and they look like from a sort of a bird's eye perspective, or from a gantry viewing perspective, like they're really engaged in the session. They're doing lots of kind of little shadow swings and providing or talking about some sort of technical element or some sort of tactic. And then there's me, and I'm kind of like, well, I'm just watching my kids play, and obviously bring them in and you kind of talk and ask questions. But I did feel a few times that, am I the odd one out here? Am I a fraud? And kind of like, should I actually be here? Am I actually good enough to be coaching in this group along with other coaches? And yeah, a couple of times that was something that really kind of sat heavy on me, and I thought, actually, no, do you know what? I'm doing the right thing. I'm doing the thing that I believe in, and I am trying to coach my players, my adults, my juniors, in a way that's going to set them up for a longer term success. And if somebody observing me thinks I'm not doing that, then I'm happy to explain to them, actually, well, what you're seeing is, yeah, me standing in the corner, but what I'm trying to do is instill in those players this approach of developing their skills, so that when they're playing, they can rely on those skills. They can pull those kind of tools out of their toolbox and play the tennis, play the game, because that's something that, like I said, going back to earlier where I said I was disillusioned with the way we coach tennis, is we're not coaching players to play tennis. We're coaching them to look nice on the practice court. And so now that I am in a bigger group, and I've kind of gone over that initial hurdle of feeling like I'm the imposter, I don't actually mind. I don't think it stops me from coaching my way. And I think actually sometimes I get people ask me kind of, what would I do in a situation? And I put my kind of newly purchased CLA hat on, and I think, right, kind of, okay, how would I help you achieve what you want to do, as another coach asking me a question? And I feel that actually, yeah, it's now more of a help than a hindrance, now being in a bigger group. So yeah, I don't have a problem going into the sort of the county kind of coach meetups or any other big area now, big platform, and be confident to say, well, okay, that's how you coach, this is how I coach, and I appreciate your approach, but I'm following my approach, and I don't feel like I'm the poor kind of relation in the family. I think the way I'm doing it is good, and I feel confident in what I'm doing. So yeah, I've really enjoyed this transition now. But that's, like I said, it was daunting at the beginning, but not as much anymore.
Great, and I think there's a couple of things there, like, that I've not considered. Like, I think your coaching journey is a little bit sort of different to what I'm used to, in terms of, obviously I work in coach education and I work in sort of lots of newly qualified coaches, and they're generally coaches who work at a club and they've got a head coach, and they will do a coaching course, or they'll see my stuff and then go back to their head coach, and the head coach goes, nah, I've always done it this way. It's been really successful for me. Yeah, forget that nonsense. We need to have the technical framework and stuff. So I think a lot of younger coaches, or even sort of newly qualified coaches, when they go into either a coaching team or a head coach dynamic, it's really hard for them to even start on this journey, because they're shot down straight away. Whereas I think just listening to you there, like, it's something that I've not took into consideration at all. Like, you were lucky in a way, because you were your own boss. You did have the room to explore. You didn't feel like there was eyes on you, and there was no like little head coach on your shoulder going, no, do it this way. I've done it for 45 years. It's worked for me. And like, yeah, but you're working at a 2-court club in the middle of nowhere. Has it really worked for you? Like, come on, let's weigh it out. So I think that's really interesting as well, that there was no heavy influence to implement what we've called a traditional way. And people get a bit wound up when I call it the traditional way, like it's the old school way. No, that's just what we call it in the science. It's just called a traditional way because what we're using is more a contemporary version. That's what science calls it. So like I was talking about a coach the other day, to a coach the other day. I say talking, we were having a heated discussion on LinkedIn, and he sent me an inbox saying, "Yo, you're just saying I'm old." I'm like, no, like traditional is just how we call it in the research and the science. So sorry, that's how I refer to it. I'm not saying you're out of date or anything. You're just using a coaching model that's based on quite, gotta be careful what I say, but quite outdated science. So we call it traditional views. Like it's interesting. So I find that quite interesting then, because it's something, again, like I said, I've not considered that myself, because one of the biggest barriers coaches have with this approach is going back to their club. And like a few things you've highlighted there, people laughing at you. I had that when I went to Batchwood the first time. Like people sort of going, "Oh, what's this guy doing? This guy's got a great CV and good reputation, and he's not done a single basket drill since he's been here." And like people making fun at you. I remember once, I won't mention the coaches, they're not there no more. But I remember once going to at Batchwood, I went to the toilet, and obviously at Batchwood we've got like the waiting area, haven't we? Like the cafe area. Yeah. And I walked through, and these two coaches were obviously talking about me, because like as I walked through to go to the toilet, they went very quiet, which, you know, okay, there's something going on there.
The telltale sign.
Yeah. So anyway, so I go to the toilet, and like as I come out, obviously you can't see when someone comes out the toilet at Batchwood until you get into the main room again. There's like a little tiny corridor, isn't there? And I heard them saying, "Oh yeah, it's ridiculous what he does. Like the art of coaching is dying." And as I walked back into the main room, it went very quiet again. So that's definitely about me. And it's like it's just like those little things like that. And I would sit in coaches meetings, and like, "Oh, we don't want like 20 minutes of skill development at the start. We want to get in and we want to see you teaching technique." And I'm like, nope. Nope. But like that was me at that point, 20 years into my coaching journey, and I had the confidence, a bit like you're saying there, I had the confidence and belief to stand up and go, "No, this is how I coach. Like this is the way I coach now, and I believe in it." And it's just like things like that are tough for young coaches, though. Like for a young coach to stand up to their head coach, and again, the head coach at the time had a big reputation and big CV and quite successful in his own right. And me to sit there in front of all the other coaches and go, no thanks. Like I'm not doing it. Like if you don't like it, like you can get rid of me, but I'm not going to coach that way. But I see why, a bit like what my journey, why young coaches comply and conform, because that pressure on you of, well, I'm a really successful coach, and I think you didn't have that in many ways, which I think's lucky in some regards.
I was going to say, sorry to jump in. I was just going to say that I think I'm fortunate in that case, in this situation where, yes, I've coached at a lot of venues, and I'm kind of condensing that into sort of being less of a pinball going everywhere. But I have been fortunate where it's been right. Here is a timetable of all the things that we're delivering. Go and deliver it, and it's just been me doing that. And so yeah, you're right. I've not had that typical sort of architecture of head coach, senior coaches who aren't the head coach, but they've been there long enough and they've got sort of lots of experience. And then you've got the sort of the junior coaches underneath them. And I've not had that. I've seen it, but I've not had it for me as such. And so it's, when you say it like that, actually, yeah, it has been a blessing in disguise where I've not necessarily had to overcome that challenge. Going back to another thing that you mentioned, obviously with, as you see a lot of new coaches coming through, newly qualified coaches, and some of the other coaches that I'm friends with and I interact with at some of my other venues that I work at. And I've seen similar things where they've come through sort of the coaching process of gaining their qualifications, and coming from existing established clubs that have that sort of traditional architecture in place, and then having this sort of fear almost, or not fear, but almost this puzzled expression on their face when they come and see me coach and they work with me as an assistant, and where they're coming to me and saying, well, we need to do this, this, and this, and do you want me to get it all ready for you? I'm like, no, we're going to do, this is what I'm intending to work with today, and this is the approach we're going to take. And yeah, because I'm seeing that from an outside perspective, I'm fortunate now, especially as you mentioned it, that I've not had to go down that route and go navigate through this problem. I would agree with you 100%. I think I'm at that point where if somebody said to me, I want you to coach differently, or there's the door, I'd say, well, thank you very much, and I wish you all the best, and hopefully I'll see you at some point in the future. But I wouldn't change it because I don't believe in it. And I think as a coach, our priority is to the players, the juniors, the adults, to help them develop. And if that means that sometimes you have to butt heads with the establishment and the sort of the old ways of the traditional kind of approaches, then I think if it's for the best for the players, then yeah, I don't see a problem with it.
There's again some really great points in that, and I think what you mentioned about the younger coaches, or even sort of, let's just keep calling them the traditional coaching. I think what's really safe about traditional coaching is there's an answer to everything. So you've got a framework, you've got a lesson plan. So you plan your lesson out, you warm up, your ABCs, you isolate or close practice, your progression, then your game. So you've got a nice plan to follow. Then you've got, well, if the player can't hit the ball over the net, it must be this, or it can be this. And you've got this nice linear checklist that goes down. And I think coaches like that because, one, it's easy. You mentioned before the cookie cutter, the copy and paste. So I can go on and deliver a lesson and make it look professional and make it look like I know what I'm doing. And I can just follow the plan and follow, I'll say, my training in terms of, well, if you can't hit the ball over the net, then you need to learn how to swing low to high. And that's how you swing low to high and that stuff. And that's really comforting. And I get the same thing with coaches now when I work with them. And obviously you've worked with me as well, which is a little bit different. But like I worked with a coach a few weeks ago and I walk on, he goes, what's the plan? And I went, no idea. I've never seen these kids before. I've never seen them. I'm just covering for another coach. You'll work with me. I've no idea. We're going to start off with a tie break. And he goes, oh, these kids can't play. And I went, how long have you been having lessons for? He says, oh, they've been coming for like a few months. Like, what, they can't play tennis? So let's just start off with a tie break, and then we'll just take it from there. And you could see the blood drain from his face. Like, it was really uncomfortable for him because all he knows is, I'll go in and I'll deliver this session. So we went in and we did a tie break. And I'm like, okay, well, these kids can't serve. So let's just do that. Like, if they can't start off a point, that should be the starting point. So we're going to play some games. And then what does he fire back? Can't serve, Steve. They can't serve. I'm like, yeah, I know. I know they can't serve, but that's why we're here. Like, it's fine. And then like, I won't go through the whole lesson, but we went through a CLA approach, an Ecological Dynamics approach. And by the end of the session, these kids could serve. Now, it wasn't serve like we would maybe in a traditional view serving. Like, there was no 90-degree elbows. There was no chopper grips, but they could get the ball above the head and start the point, which they couldn't do at the start of the session. And like, for me, I like that because it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable driving to that session because I don't know what to expect. But because I don't know what to expect, I've got no prior assumptions. So I just see it for what it is. Like, I just see the lesson for what it is. And I see where they're at in the moment. And I just teach what's in front of me. I'm not teaching a textbook lesson. And like, that's what I think traditional coaching likes so much, is that safety net of, I call it like the airline pilot. When things go wrong with the airplane, you can get the handbook out. And because it's a machine, you can go through step-by-step process. And someone who works in or used to work in computers, you know what I'm talking about. Like, you just have the diagnostic manual, but coaching's not like that. And I think that's where a lot of new coaches worry, because there's no safety net. But like you mentioned in the second part there, like with the reflection bit, that's the art of coaching. Like, I get stuff wrong all the time. I set up practices that don't work all the time because I'm learning as well, and that's okay, and that's safe, and that's the sort of the teamwork between the coach and the players. Of, we're trying to find the solution together. And the amount of time where the players said to me, like, "Oh, I can't do this. Can you help?" I'm like, "I've no idea how to do it, but let's find out. Like, let's go together." And I think for me, I coach now, whereas previously I didn't coach. For 18 years, I just delivered tennis activity. I wasn't a coach. I just delivered stock lessons. Short ball down the line, mate, into a volley. That was my classic go-to session. That's all I did, because it was easy, and it looked like learning was taking place. But now, and I'll come on to the second point about working in a team and parents. But now I coach, a bit like what you're saying. I know we've had conversations. Now I stand back. I don't say a word. I don't do anything. I just literally try and keep myself really still, because I'm looking at what's happening with the players and their behavior. And then I'm going to start tweaking stuff to get either a more positive behavior somewhere else, or to stop what we may perceive as a negative behavior. So if a player's playing with fear, okay, I need to change that. So how can I release that behavior and get a more positive way? But I don't have a plan for that, because I don't know how the player is going to interact with the game. And for me, goes back to my thing about the art of coaching is disappearing with Steve. No, it's not actually. Coaching's actually the forefront of what I'm doing, because I'm coaching what's in front of me. And that's the bit parents don't understand as well. And I've had lots of complaints about me not being intense enough, and not shouting enough, and not doing enough demos, and not helping the kids enough. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't understand what's going on. Like, this is what's actually happening. I'm watching behavior. I'm changing behavior. I'm constantly, and it sounds really bad word, but I'm constantly manipulating the environment. And sometimes, like, by jumping in and rescuing players doesn't help them at all. So I've gone off on a massive rant there. But for me, I think that's, again, that fear of, or sorry, that maybe not the fear, but the pull and the toxic nature of traditional coaching. It's a bit like fast food. It's easy, it's convenient, but it's not very good for you. But coaches want that ease of lessons. Yeah, sorry, I've gone off on a massive rant, which I told myself I wasn't going to do. But I think you hit a really important notion on the head of the safety net for young coaches, of the lesson plan. Sorry, mate, I've gone off on one.
No. I agree with you completely. I remember all these lesson plans, and you're practicing them because that's what you're going to be assessed on, and you're trying to frantically scramble through your thoughts of, oh, hold on, what do I do? Oh, what's there? How do I progress this? And then you then go and you leave the course, and you've done, and the qualifications behind you, and now you're in this big world of coaching, and you're going like, okay, I've got to write out these lessons. I'm taking all these lessons. And I was there, and not too long ago. This is not like I'm talking about, like you said, you've got a 20 plus years of experience. I'm talking about a few years ago, and I was there. I was that sort of, right, I've got my laminated little A5 little homemade book of coaching. And I thought that was the way, that was nirvana. Like, I would go, well, I could go anywhere, and I'd take out my little book on the train, and I'd sit there and I'd pick a lesson, and I'd say, well, okay, kind of, what did we do last week? And then I'd say, okay, well, what would then fit? And then I'd pick a thing. And now there is no lesson plan. My lesson plan is walk on the court and see what happens. And so yeah, it's liberated my thought process. I feel less stressed as a coach, and I feel like I can then provide a better coaching experience to the player, because I'm not going in with a predetermined idea of that's what I'm going to give you. Yeah, it's like you've got a cold, but I'm going to give you a plaster to stick on your arm, because I know how to give you a plaster and peel off the plaster because I've done my first aid, but you don't need it. What you need is cold medicine. You need something that's appropriate for what you need. So yeah, I think that I agree with you. I've felt like I'm in a better place with my coaching, because I'm not worried about crumbs. I need to get my lesson plans out. I need to make sure I've got everything kind of there, because I don't know. I run, as you've seen my Instagram, I run weekly adult sessions in North London in Finsbury Park. And the structure of those sessions is it's purely pay and play. There is no block booking. So I will have certain people who turn up weekly because they're just proactive to get their next booking in, but I will have a lot of people who turn up on the day and have never been to a session before with me. They've never been to any of previous of the sessions on that Tuesday that I'm there. And when I was fresh out of the coaching academy, here you go, here's your qualification, where, hey, I was thinking, crap, how do I go through this? Because I went, right, okay, I've got to do a 6-week term or 10-week term, whatever it is. I'll do serving 1 week, forehand, backhand. I'll combine a bit of forehand and backhand. Maybe I'll do some volleys. And I can do 8 weeks of coaching like that. But the person comes in 3 weeks into however I'm doing, and I've never met this person. They've come to my beginner session, and I'm already down the sort of like approach on the forehand, and then, like I said, sort of that's the building shot there, and then right, we're gonna develop that with, okay, next shot. You then come in, you follow it in, and you put a volley away. And this person doesn't know how to score tennis. There was one lesson where I say lesson. It's a lesson that I learned. A gentleman arrived to my beginner class, and I said, right, okay, so we're going to go play some points. Okay, first to 10 points, and we'll take it from there. Okay. And the person said to me, in all honesty, all frankness, and it wasn't a kind of a joke, there's no sarcasm, it's, how do I score a point? And I actually stood there for a second, and I thought, actually, genuinely, at no point have I ever said how we score points. And so this person actually has a valid question. Is they don't understand that to win a point, the rules of tennis say the ball must bounce 2 times, or your opponent must hit the ball in the net or outside of the marked area for that point to be over and for that person to win a point. Whether you're doing single point scoring or you're doing the normal 15, 30, 40 point scoring, this person genuinely didn't know. And I had to realize, and I realized at that point, that actually coming in with a preconceived idea of a coach that you should know something about tennis is wrong. And so, like I said, kind of moving into the CLA approach, this was one of these sort of footsteps or stepping stones that kind of got me down this route. Was, yeah, I don't think now that somebody knows how to play tennis. I ask them, and I really kind of get a feel for where they are, if they're in my beginner class, and kind of tying that to, people can't come along every week because it's not done like that. So I have to change the way I coach. And by adopting the constraint led, I've gone away from this is what I'm going to do this week, and gone to this approach of everybody starts by playing tennis, everybody starts by hitting balls over the net, and we develop from there, because you sit and you watch TV and you see players play, and I see these great rallies and people are hitting the ball so fast with such spin and it's going all sorts of directions. Like, I couldn't teach that if I just drop fed the ball and say, right, here you go, stand here, start with your racket there, and I place the perfect ball into that little path. I did this, and this is a learning of my own. As I said, I wasn't always sort of aware of the constraint-led approach. I wasn't aware of ecological dynamics. I was just, I've been taught this, and I experienced as a kid this type of coaching. So I'm drop feeding, and then I'm moving a bit back, and I kind of like throw feeding, and then I go back to the other side of the net, and I'm trying to rally feed. And as soon as I hit the ball a bit harder, they're just waving their racket like they're swatting flies, and it didn't work. And that's why I'm enjoying this approach, because I can go, like you said, I can just start with a blank slate, see who is there, see what is in front of me, and coach the people that are there, and not take out my sort of laminated A3 kind of coach's cheat sheet and say, right, we're just going to do this today because I don't know anything else.
Mate, there's so much resonating with me in that, because like everything that you said, that was pretty much the way I used to coach and set things up. Like the over planning, like my lessons used to be so detailed. Like I'm talking like what biomechanical segments of the body I'd be working on and all sorts. But there's a couple of things that I learned very quickly on. Like if I had a 6 weeks block, I remember when I started coaching, it used to be forehands, backhands, volleys, serve. Then it might be return, and then it's match play.
Yeah.
But what I found pretty quick on, if you missed week 3, whatever it is, when we did serve, we didn't do serve again until next term. So it's like, if you miss a week, then you don't learn that shot, which is quite important. And we spent the whole hour, like you're saying, just basket feeding the whole forehands. And the kids might got good at it, but we don't touch the forehand again for another 6 weeks. So like there's no opportunity for what we know as repetition without repetition or volume, because like you're doing it every other week. So I very quickly realized that didn't work. So I moved to a system. Well, I'm going to work on a forehand for a term. So I'm going to do forehand attack, forehand defense, forehand build, forehand trade, forehand neutralize. So I went down that phase, but that didn't work, because I'll spend 6 weeks in the forehand, then 6 weeks in the backhand, and it just made it even worse, because you wouldn't go back to the forehand again for about another 4 or 5 months. And that I coached like that for ages, and it's like, this is just not working. Like it makes no sense. Why am I taking, like you mentioned there towards the end, I'm taking segments out of a very dynamic game, and when I put them back in, they're not working. But then going back to the planning a little bit as well, like I'd write the best lesson plan in the world. I'd go to the session and one kid would turn up. I'm like, I've spent an hour writing this lesson plan out, and the one kid who can't do anything's turned up. So lesson plan's gone out the window. Or I'd write a lesson plan out, I'll get there, and it would just go chaotic, and I'm like, oh, that plan is out the window. But I'd probably just stick to the plan no matter what happened. So I would progress after 10 minutes, because my plan said to progress after 10 minutes. No matter if they got it or not. And even if you got it after 30 seconds, I still spent 10 minutes on it, because my plan said it. And again, goes back to how I was trained and educated. That's what my lesson plan was. And you stick to the plan. And I heard a very high profile coach this week saying planning is everything. And I'm like, I don't think it is. Because if you plan it, like I always say, like if you go in looking to fix the forehand, that's all you'll see. You'll miss probably lots of relevant information. I love that little example of the plaster on the kid who's got the flu. If you go in just looking to give a plaster, that's all you're looking to do. You miss all the other symptoms. And like for me, that's one of the downsides to planning. But also like working with good players, we used to do a thing called, like, we used to do like periods of like training block training, tactical training. But what I used to do, I used to plan out 12 weeks of training, every session planned out. Like, this is what we're doing week 1, week 2, week 3 for 12 weeks. I'd write it all out, give it to the player, give it to the parents. After week 3, that plan up went out the window. And when I used to show my coach mentor, he used to go to me, yeah, you're just not disciplined enough. You're not disciplined enough. You're not following your plan through. Like, but I'm like, yeah, but I noticed something else. So we started off on this journey, but I've noticed something there. Yeah, no. You have to stick to it. You've planned it out. You've got to stick to the plan. And that's when I started to rebel a little bit. And that's what started to turn my head. Like, well, this is not working. Like, I've got the best plan in the world. I've got a really high profile mentor. But what I'm seeing on paper is not what I'm seeing on court. And that's what started to make me feel uneasy about how I was coaching. These plans, these lesson plans, these lesson structures, they just didn't work. And I was like, is this really what coaching's about? And that's what sort of made me get uneasy towards the end of, like, I'd have these unbelievable detailed plans. I'd know biomechanics like the back of my hand. Like, I'm so good at tactical and technical analysis. So I spent years doing it. But like you're saying there, I would go to a tournament and it would all disappear. We've just spent 8 weeks working on that serve and it's disappeared. Why? What's happened there? And what I didn't take into consideration at the time is I'm working with a human. I'm working with a human. I'm not working with a computer. I'm not working with a machine. Like, I'm working with a human. And that's, again, I've said the story a million times, but that's when I start looking at psychology. Like, it must be the psychology of it, because it's not the tactics, not the technique. It's not the planning. Like, all that's like high level stuff, and everyone's saying how good I am at that stuff. But then I'm not seeing the transfer. And I think that's where coaches get lost in the planning. And you can have the best plan in the world, but when you go in that court, if those kids can't do it, that plan's out the window straight away. And it's like, have you got the coaching skills? And yes, you could talk about differentiation and the step principle and make it bigger or smaller, which is, by the way, is constraint-led coaching. That's all it is. But then for me, it's the most important bit is, and I mentioned earlier in the podcast, is the behavior of the player. Like, behavior drives everything. So now when I'm coaching, I look at behavior, and behavior gets a really bad word because we always think about behavior being good or being naughty. But no, I look at behavior different. Like, being brave is a behavior, being committed is a behavior, being scared is a behavior, being anxious is a behavior. So that's what I look at now. So when I'm coaching lessons, that's all I'm looking at is, how are you behaving in this situation? And is it a positive behavior that's helping you, or is it a slightly not positive behavior that's holding you back? And okay, well, how can I guide you towards? So I know we've talked about this in the past, and this is leading up sort of onto another question. A big pushback I get with that is, well, inexperienced coaches can't do that. Like, a newly qualified level 3 can't do that, Steve, because they haven't got your experience. And I'm like, well, not really, because I see myself now as only having 5 years coaching experience. The other 18 years, I wasn't coaching. I've only had 5 years experience working on behavioral stuff. So what's your sort of thoughts on that? Like, a newly qualified coach can't work this way because you haven't got the experience. But it's like, that's a constant pushback that I get from national governing bodies. Like, oh yeah, CLA is great, Ecological Dynamics is great. No, coaches need the framework. And I always sort of think back to, that's like saying players need fundamentals. That's like saying players need to learn how to hit a forehand before they can play. Like, that's traditional thinking, but now within coach education. What's your thoughts on that? So, as a newly qualified coach?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in the sense that I disagree with their thought process. The constraint-led approach has allowed me to change the way I coach and get more out of my players and give them more confidence in what they're doing. The constraint-led approach, as you've mentioned yourself, and I've experienced it as well, it's a learning evolutionary process, and you're not always going to get every single tweak right. Sometimes you have to go in and you have to kind of change things because, like you said, use the word behavior. We've seen it before where you're wanting them to explore one type of behavior, whether that's being braver and playing more to the space, but they're not doing it. So we change the court, we change the task. And so taking that out of that and putting it into the new coach sort of and saying, right, actually look at the players in front of you. And as a new coach myself, as a relatively new coach and relatively new to CLA, I found it's quite easy to adopt this process. So I don't think that, I disagree with the thought process that you need to have X amount of years of experience coaching under your belt to then go, right, okay, you can now coach CLA to as a new coach to junior players. I've seen it firsthand where I've come into a new group who've had an existing coach, a traditional coach who's now moved on. I've inherited the group, and I started off with my CLA approach, and the first 2 sessions easily, it was like, what are we meant to be doing? Where's the basket fee? The players lined up expecting, I'm just pushing a trolley because I just needed to get it out onto the court, into the corner so they could have balls. But they saw me pushing a trolley and lined up as if they're going to start their drills. And so I then, it took me a few weeks before they then realized, actually, no, the way we start, the way we play is different. And that same group of players, now when I get on court, they're already at the back, they're playing, they're competing with each other, and it's taken not that long for them to adopt it. So from my experience, actually applying CLA as a new coach wasn't that difficult. It's about confidence in yourself, and that's kind of how I feel. That's the way I see it. Is I am confident now more so than I was before, but I'm obviously still learning. I'm still making mistakes here and there, but I'm confident to go on and say, right, like, this is what we're going to try and do. This is what I want you to do. This is where we're going to kind of try and take this time that we've got with each other, this session, in what direction we're going to apply that sort of apply that work ethic and what we're trying to do. So a new coach, I can really say that as a new coach, there is nothing stopping me from going to a junior group and working with CLA, because I've not felt like it's. I think that the easiest way to explain this is I felt it was harder to learn the traditional approach to pass my qualifications, to prove that I can coach in a traditional manner, than it has been for me to learn how to coach in the CLA model and get my players to work with me and to work in a CLA kind of template, in a CLA environment, and see them progress. So yeah, I don't believe it's hard. I don't believe it's out of the reach for newly qualified coaches coming through to actually go, yeah, I can be confident in myself to go and take the CLA framework's probably not the right word, but the CLA model and start to work with that to help my players develop, because it's tennis at the end of the day. That's what I've realized. You're here to teach tennis. I've spoken to football coaches who already use the equivalent CLA kind of games and styles and approaches in their football coaching with their junior players, and just having those conversations, kind of emboldened me to say, actually, yeah, I'm not doing something so outlandish. There are other people doing very similar things and seeing those results. And the particular gentleman is not a full-time Premier League coach. He coaches Sunday League football for kiddies. So, and this is grassroots football, and they're doing that there. And I'm like, well, okay, grassroots tennis, I've got junior players, and I'm helping them develop, but I don't feel like I've had to have so much more experience of traditional coaching to then go, right, I can now skip traditional coaching and start teaching CLA to juniors, because to me, it felt like one doesn't connect you to another. It's not a stepping stone, it's two approaches. So why do I need to develop one approach to such a high level before I can start teaching the other one? So yeah, I don't believe that there is a barrier to new coaches coaching junior players, or even beginner adults, for example, with a CLA mentality. I think probably the only barrier, you mentioned this earlier on the call, is if they work in a bigger environment with that architecture of a traditional head coach, a bunch of traditional senior coaches. Their barrier to teaching CLA to juniors will probably be the structure and not necessarily their own ability, because I don't see their ability as necessarily being a barrier. It's probably the confidence in themselves to go out and try it and do it, given the fact that they may have that sort of architecture of traditional coaching everywhere else within that club or within that centre. So
yeah, no, it's okay, it's good. But I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in there, and I think that's my experience as well. So I've done quite a few workshops, and I've worked with lots of coaches at this point now with this approach. It is easier for me to mentor and work with a less experienced coach in this way, in this lens, because they don't have any biases. Like when I work, and I did a workshop the other week with some very experienced coaches, been coaching longer than me. And straight away, when you say things like, well, the brain doesn't control movement, they go, oh, what? No, that can't be right. That can't be right. I'm like, no, it's part of a system. Like, it doesn't control movement. It's involved, doesn't control. I remember your face when I told you that. He's like, what? But, or like when I say, like, there's no such thing as muscle memory, or there's no such, like, repetition is really bad for the human body. We don't want repetition. We don't want the same thing. Like, they have that bias because that's all they know and that's all they've worked on. And then you get the whole, oh, I've done this for 30 years and I've been successful, or yeah. So there's a lot of bias there, and that's really hard to break away from. And even I went sort of, when I transitioned from traditional to constraint-led approach, I still had my biases. So there's a long period there where I did both, but I quickly realized that they both contradict each other. Like they both don't mix together very well. It's oil and water. They both look the same and have the same properties, but they don't mix. And I think I found that really hard with coaches, because coaches will buy into the stuff, they'll buy into the methodology, but then they won't let go with that bias, and they try and do the best of both worlds, and it makes it worse because the players get really confused. Now, give me a brand new coach, because they don't know any different. It's easier. So I did a workshop, a coach qualification, and I did a little bit on CLA within the qualification because it was part of the module. And the stuff they came up with was amazing, because they had no prior knowledge of traditional coaching. So they could implement it very quick. And yes, the theory is dense and stuff, but the theory is quite light. Like, humans learn by interaction. Humans learn by playing. Your job is to create an environment in which they can explore, and you manipulate it by constraints. And the stuff they came up with is amazing. And it's on our academy, because I filmed it on a national governing body qualification. And it's amazing. And the stuff they came up with, I'm like, I've not thought of that. That's so good. When I presented CLA to this group of experienced coaches, I spent 4 hours at this point telling them the theory, showed them lots of practical examples, and I hand it over to them and I say, okay, this is the problem. The problem is they're not getting enough height on the forehand. The forehand keeps hitting the net. Can you use a constraint-led approach to go and fix it? All the coaches went out and basket fed. After 4 hours of me going, basket feeding doesn't work. Like, we've got to make it representative. They all went out, and I stopped them like, what are you doing? But goes back to, like you said about the kids, they were just so used to coaching that way. That's all they know. And that goes back to that comfort. They feel comfortable with the basket. They feel comfortable given the technical, explicit instructions. So even in this environment where I've spent 4 hours, by the way, telling them like this is a more efficient, effective approach, when they were given the opportunity to present their own CLA ideas, they went back to the basket. And when I challenged them on it, because like we just did representative learning design, I said, well, out of a scale of 1 to 10, how representative this? And they all said, oh, it's 1. It's not very good. I'm like, why are you doing it then? You all know it's not good. You all know that you all now know that it's not as effective as we believed it was. It worked, but not to a degree that we thought it did. And it was a case of, oh, beep, yeah, you're right, but that's all I know. And that's more difficult. So when national governing bodies, when they put constraint-based coaching into a level 3 or skill acquisition in a level 5, it's too late by that point, because all the bias is there, all the confirmation bias, all the survivorship bias, it's all there, and that's really hard to turn around. So again, this is my thoughts on it. Like, it's easier, like a level 1 16-year-old coach, this is dead easy. This is what constraints are. Your job is to create an environment. You don't need any technical knowledge at all. You just need to know how to play the game, like how you win points. Okay, you win points by putting the ball in a position where your opponent can't get it back. Can you get your players to do that? You don't need to learn biomechanics. You don't need to learn physical literacy skills. You just need to know the game of tennis, how to win. Goes back to your point with the adult before. How do you win points? And what can you do to win more points? That's all you need to learn as a 16-year-old coach. And this is a little framework's okay word. This is a little framework called the constraint-led approach. Manipulate the space, the task. You do that on your level 1 anyway. That's it. And if you do that, your players will be better playing the game. But the challenge is we believe that we've got to program coaches with all this very complicated frameworks. And we shared a framework the other day of like this massive page of information that's so linear. Whereas I'm like, well, yeah, you just hit the ball down, you win the point. Like, you don't need to know any of that stuff. We make it so complicated, and I think a part of that is peer pressure from parents. Like, parents think knowledge is really valuable, but I think, and I've had lots of discussions with Matt Wiggum on this, I think we give coaches too much knowledge, but knowledge that they don't need, really. I am conscious of time because I know you're on court. Just maybe 2 minutes. What's your thoughts on that? Maybe with a traditional way of education, is there too much knowledge? Is there too much information?
Yes, I know exactly the slide that you showed, the updated framework, the tactical framework, and like I said, I when I did my level 3 for the national government body, I felt it was harder to learn and harder to kind of learn this acquire the skills of that qualification than it has been to adopt the CLA approach and the CLA framework in the way that I coach now. So I think that overall, we don't necessarily need to be spoon-fed quite the same amount. I mean, I remember when doing it long ago, you'd get like a ring binder folder like that thick with so much paper and so much content. But like you said, there's only like 5 shots in tennis. You serve the ball over the net, you might hit a forehand, you might hit a backhand, you might get a bit closer, you might put a volley in. Like, you're just playing the game. So now when I coach, it's scary to think how much you think you have to know, you have to tell people. And it's this sort of this irony is that the more a coach talks, the less their players actually playing and learning. But you feel, and like I said, when I was still quite new, obviously I'm not as new now, but when I was still really new, it was like, I felt like I had to say something every time. I had to say something. I had to show this. I had to explain that. I had to go into like trying to absorb all of the things that I've learned and experienced and spoon feed that to the players straight away. Every time they hit a ball, every time they like right, so the racket face angle and the path and with the acceleration and your contact point, this and that. And I was like, and you see the bewilderment on the player's face because they don't know where to start. And I think it's partly because when you're taught all of this so that they expect you to know it, that when you do go out into the wild, into the wilderness, that you've got that there. And I think if they adapted their processes for coaching new coach or educating new coaches in that sense of, because they say it, and it's really bizarre. I've heard coaches and coach educators so many times say this phrase, which is coach the player you've got in front of you, coach the person or the people that are in front of you. But to do that, that's where you have to use CLA. But because that's coaching the person in front of you, that's understanding what can they and can't they do, and setting up that environment so they learn that skill. But taking your pre-written game lesson plans and choosing, right, today I'm going to do this lesson plan, isn't coaching the person in front of you. And so I think they do need to adapt the way that the new kind of coach education program is kind of structured, so that you're not given heavy kind of content that doesn't represent what tennis is. Because you've been in the game long enough, in the coaching game, I've been in it long enough for my experience to know that players on the court won't care if they are in a both back situation, if they're trading and they're trying to get a rising ball past the baseline. They're just trying to not lose. They're trying to win. They're trying to get the ball over the net. And I think as a coach, that's where we need to be taking this sort of thought process more seriously, which is, how do you get your players playing tennis? Not how do you get your coaches to understand all of the minutiae of everything. And I have no idea of biomechanics. I just know that my arm swings in a certain way. I couldn't tell you anything. And I don't necessarily think I needed to know that. And I think, yeah, I agree with you that it's probably time that more of a thought process or more effort is given to developing the way we teach new coaches so that they feel empowered and creative and be able to go and have confidence to go on a court and use their creativity. Because it's interesting what you said. You took the same workshop and you delivered it to a blank slate, and then you've delivered it to a dictionary. And you saw two different things. You saw the creativity from players, from junior coaches who haven't yet kind of been indoctrinated in the traditional element to that extent. And you saw kind of all of the games and the creativity that they were able to kind of come up with. And then you saw, actually, here's that sort of wealth of history in coaching and players' experiences and coaches' experiences, and they struggled with it. So I think I think the next generation of coaches need to really be kind of taught less, taught more in the sense of empowering them to be creative, empowering them to come up with solutions, but taught less of the here is the rigid, yes, this is how you have to do it, the robotic element, and more of the go out and be creative, go out and set yourself challenges and try and overcome those challenges.
Yeah, and it's there's so much good stuff in there. But the way I look at it, it's like, well, we need almost like an ecological approach to Coach Ed, because like if you look at everything you just said there, like, do coaches need that much information? Because we're saying don't overload the players with information, but then we overload coaches with information. We talk about being player-centered, meeting the players where they're at, but then we deliver them a set lesson. That's not meeting the players where they're at. And then if you look at it from a coach education point of view, everyone coaches in different environments, but then we give them all the same framework. So for me, that doesn't quite make sense. There's a disconnect there. Like, I work in a indoor tennis center. You work at a church club. Big disconnect of how we coach. So listen, I am conscious of time. I know you're on court now. Just so, can people reach you anywhere? Where can they follow you? Give out your Instagram handle, because I know you're pushing your Instagram at the moment, and some good content on there as well. So people should follow you on Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, Instagram's probably the easiest way that people can find me. It's just johncvitamovic.tennis. Obviously, my surname is a bit of a weird one to spell, but I'm sure we can put the link in somewhere. Otherwise, yeah, it's JOHN, and yeah, you get it. But no, message me on Instagram if you have any questions. Obviously, I appreciate a follow. If you have any ideas of anything, then great. But no, I think, like I said, I think this has been a really useful tool for me, which is the CLA approach, the adopting of a way to coach differently. That has meant that I feel more of a coach. I feel more confident in my coaching, and I think that there's so much more. There's just scratching the surface, between sort of the content that's available on the My Tennis Coaching Academy and the sort of the workshops that you've done, I've felt that what I'm learning is putting me in a good stead to coach better tennis, to coach players in a more effective way as I go on. And so I really appreciate your time and having me on. And it's been really helpful.
No, mate, we'll definitely have to do a part.
Not fall asleep listening to me.
No, don't be silly. We'll have to do a part 2 sort of further down the road to see where you're up to, because like you mentioned a few times, this is an ever evolving learning system. And like, I look back in 12 months ago how I used to coach. I'm like, oh, that wasn't that good, wasn't it? So, but that's the beauty of it, because it's ever changing, and we're getting deeper down the rabbit hole. But listen, mate, appreciate it, and enjoy your time on court.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So unfortunately, John had to run on court. Good job. He has no lesson plan, so he can just coach in the moment. I just want to do it just like a little quick hot reflection on the chat. First and foremost, thanks so much to John for giving up his time this morning. Obviously, he was at the club, so apologies if there was any sort of buffering or slight delay. But what a journey this young coach has gone on. And I think he's been coaching now a couple of years. I was fortunate enough to meet him when I was a head coach at his club, funny enough. So I've known him as a player, as a club member, and then I've obviously been involved a little bit in his coaching journey. And obviously he's now part of our coaching academy. But I think some really key messages in there from the chat is planning. I think we overplan as coaches, lesson plans, term plans, and it's like tennis coaching is non-linear. Learning is non-linear. And I mentioned in the podcast, in the chat, like, you can plan out 52 weeks. But after week 1, it's probably not going to go to plan, because you're dealing with humans. the humans change from minute to minute, hour to hour, day by day. And I think it's really important that we don't overplan. And I think one point I will make now is when I go into a session this evening, I will have an intention because I'll have some previous experience with the groups tonight. So I know what we're going after. I know what they found successful and what they struggled with. So I'll go in with an intention. I might go in with a basic practice design, so a drill or a practice design from an ecological point of view. And then I'll just see what happens. And then I'll tailor it as the sort of session goes on. So really think I'd be quite cautious of over planning. I think secondly, just how brave that coach is. Like, he's come through an educational system where he's been told that this is how you coach and this is the most efficient, effective way to coach. He's then had the bravery to challenge that a little bit and sort of push back a little bit and go, well, that doesn't quite make sense. And then he's also then looked elsewhere and he's found obviously my stuff and the constraint-led approach and ecological dynamics. And then he's been brave enough to put that in place. Now, I do think he's quite fortunate in many ways because he's not had a head coach. He's not been in a big team of coaches to, a bit like me, saying that he's rubbish and doesn't know what he's doing. So I think that's really helped him in that space. And I think if you're a head coach watching this and if your coaches are trying stuff out that's different and new, just think about the impact you have on them. Because what's worked for you as a coach will probably not work for them. And you've got to allow your players a space and the autonomy to grow, just like you do your players. And that was the point that we were making towards the end. Like, within coach education, we talk about being player-centered, coaching what's in front of you, which John mentioned, and really looking after the individual. But then we have to do that with coaches as well. Like, we have to educate the coaches as individuals. We've got to be coach-centered. We've got to meet the coaches where they're at, and just giving them knowledge and giving them frameworks probably isn't the best way forwards. And with an ecological approach, it's giving them less information, but more impactful. It's educating them on how they can make players better by using human behavior. Because again, no matter what we think, players aren't machines. They're not AI automated systems just yet. They are human living beings. And you need to understand how the human interacts with the practice is either going to make or break the practice. And I think just educating coaches on what's important in terms of, okay, this is the theory. This is how you set up an effective practice. And this is how you can then tweak it. I think that's a great starting point. I understand that national governing bodies, it's difficult. Listen, coach education is difficult. Coach qualification is difficult because you're having an end assessment at the end. Okay, it's hard because it has to be standardized across the country or nations if you're a big international coach developer. Like, I understand coach education is tough. But if we're talking about not giving players too much information, if we're talking about being more player-centered and meeting players where they're at, then coach education has to reflect that as well. You can't say that we want you to be player-centered, but here is the one framework how to coach those players. It just contradicts itself. And it's the same with coaches. I don't think you can educate two coaches the same way. There obviously might be core principles of theory or core principles or frameworks that you may want to give coaches. But I also think that introducing CLA or ecological dynamics later on the coach's journey is a lot more challenging. And I've learned that over the past sort of 18 months, working with a bigger spectrum of coaches now across lots of different cultures and countries as well. It's more difficult to get them to shift away because of that confirmation and survivorship bias. But listen, hopefully you enjoyed the podcast. If you are a coach, and listen, if you're a coach who really believes in basket feeding and isolated practice and technical coaching, give me a shout. Could be great to jump on. And it's not a case of to one-up each other or to belittle each other's approaches, but just have an open discussion of sort of, okay, how do you coach? And one of the biggest misconceptions of me is people think I'm always constantly judging coaches. So when coaches work with me, like they're constantly worried about what I'm thinking. I'm not bothered how you coach. You coach how you coach. And I think coaches coach the best way they can with what they have. All I try and do with this channel and my work is, okay, can I present you with something different? Can I present you with a different way of looking at coaching? So it'd be good to have a sort of a backwards and forwards with a quote unquote traditional coach. As always, please check out mytenniscoaching.com. If you are interested in my Tennis Coach Academy, in which John is a member, check out the link down below and watch the video on the screen now. And until next week's podcast, where we're going to discuss what learning actually looks like, have a great week, and I will see you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to the My Tennis Coaching Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an update.